we're picking up at 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And just if you're going to say something about that, 1st and 2nd Chronicles are basically another account of Samuel and the kings. But what we're looking at in 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and I may have already mentioned this, which I don't remember, but it's dealing with just the kings of Judah. But it's starting its genealogy with Adam, you'll see in the first verse of 1st Chronicles. So it's trying to span the history of mankind up to this point, and it's going to end in 2nd Chronicles with the end of the captivity in Babylon by Judah and the commissioning of them to go back and begin to rebuild Jerusalem. So, it's trying to cover a really long span. Like that initial part, it's not really talking about creation, but it mentions Adam. It's not really talking about the Babylonian captivity, but it does mention the decree to go back. So mostly it's dealing with the kings of Judah, and it's just kind of a recap. It's starting when Israel and Judah, Israel as a whole nation before it was divided, started with King Saul and then David, and then we get into Solomon, and some of that stuff it spends a little time with, and then it zips through the end of that. But it's really good reading the second part of 2nd Chronicles. Let me just say that now. Okay, so what we're looking at here is there's several noteworthy insertions in 1st Chronicles. The first 8 chapters are basically genealogy, and that's kind of hard to read. But as you get through there's a few little things that are just thrown in there. The prayer of Jabez is one that's in 1st Chronicles, and books have been written about that and stuff. And it's just one short little verse or two, but it's important, just thrown in the middle of this reading. A reference to Nimrod. All kinds of stories are out there about Nimrod in these days. All kinds of history. A lot of it is made up. A lot of it is bad. It's like it's not consistent. There's a book called The Two Babylons by Hislop, and a lot of people got their information about Nimrod out of this book. Well, that book is not done very well. The research is not good, but somehow it became an authority about Nimrod. Well, Nimrod is mentioned in 1st Chronicles here. The earth being divided is a big. It says in those days the earth was divided. I think it's verse 19 of 1 Chronicles 1. The 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of one was Peleg, and for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. And it's like, that's a mystery verse. The earth was divided. What's it talking about? Well, I'm not going to explain it to you. I don't know that I know. I could throw out some theories. I don't even know if we're going to talk about that. But that's one of those other things just thrown in the middle of this introductory section, which is mostly talking about genealogies. And like I said, it is kind of hard to read the first part of 1st Chronicles. And unfortunately, that deflects people from really getting into these books. They're rich. They really have some good things. If you can't just handle all the genealogies, skip through there and start a little later, but don't avoid the book, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, just because of that. Okay, my plea to read 1st and 2nd Chronicles. But the overall purpose of 1st and 2nd Chronicles is to bring us to the time when God's choice among the nations, the line of Abraham, becomes a nation. Okay, so it's just giving us the quick genealogy, brings us to the time of Abraham, that God chooses Abraham. He chooses the seed that will come from Abraham. And so what 1st and 2nd Chronicles is doing that is a little different than Samuel and Kings. 1st and 2nd Kings, or 2nd Kings, will cover Israel, the 10-nation tribe of Israel. So 1st and 2nd Chronicles doesn't do that. It's basically just covering the Messianic line, the line that Jesus will come through. And so that's the tribe of Judah. That's the southern kingdom. That's what we would just call Judah when it was divided, when Israel was divided into Israel, 10 northern tribes, and Judah, 2 southern tribes. So 1st and 2nd Chronicles is dealing with basically just the tribe of Judah, with the nation of Judah. And so that's the difference in the focus. So the important thing is they want to get to the promise of Abraham and show you how that goes through, show you how they became captive, and then leave you with the very end with the hope of they're going back in to rebuild. So it's kind of just the history of Judah coming into a nation, becoming a nation, Israel as a whole becoming a nation, following Judah's existence after the split, and then bringing you to the point of, okay, there's hope coming, there's going to be a real big rebuilding. that's the part in history we're dealing with First and Second Chronicles. Okay, there's different details maybe in the Chronicles than there are in Kings. Some of the things add things, some of them take away and don't mention things. So in a little different kind of view sometimes. So it's good to read over that even if you've read through the Kings. In 1 Chronicles 15, when the ark was moved, verse 13 tells us why that Uzzah was struck down. We don't see that in the Kings when they're moving the ark and the ark kind of came off balance and he reached out and touched it and God struck him down. And David's like, what in the world are you doing? I'm afraid of you, God. He didn't know why he struck him down. It says in verse 13 of 1 Chronicles 15, because you did not carry it at the first, the Lord our God made an outburst on us, for we did not seek him according to the ordinance. What it's saying there is they were instructed as to how to carry the ark, and it was supposed to be on poles on the shoulders of the priests. 2 poles, they didn't touch the ark. The poles extended through these rings, came out the end on both ends, and the priests would just put that on their shoulders and they would carry the ark like that. And that's the way they were supposed to do it. Well, they had it on a new cart. That's what the Philistines chose, and they just kind of carried it that way too. Well, they weren't following the ordinance, and it got them in trouble. They weren't, because then they didn't reverence the Lord like they should. They weren't supposed to touch the ark. But there so Uzzah reaches out and touches it. Somebody brought up, says, well, what's a new cart made out of? It says, well, boards and big wheels. It says, the presence of God can never be carried through with boards and big wheels. On boards and big wheels, if talking about maybe church boards and important people. Anyway, that kind of I don't know, that was cute anyway. So God's promise to David, we see in 1 Chronicles 17, where it says in verse 12, he shall build for me a house, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, he shall be my son, and I will not take my loving kindness away from him, as I took it from him who was before you. But I will settle him in my house and my kingdom forever, and his throne shall be established forever. So this is a promise to David and his seed. And in some ways, his seed was referring both to Solomon and to Jesus, to the greater David later. So there's promises that are fulfilled, some of them in Solomon actually building the temple, the house for God in the next generation. David wasn't allowed to build it, and the reference is made to he who came before you in not a good way, because he took his loving kindness away from Saul, because Saul did not obey the Lord. And once again, it was those details. He tried to act like a priest and making an offering when he wasn't supposed to. He was supposed to destroy all of the Amalekites, and he didn't. And then he said he did. I obeyed, and that's when Samuel said, "What is the bleating of these sheep in my ears?" And what's going on? You weren't supposed to take anything, and you took this. So Saul was disobedient in that, and David was not in those respects. And so David was promised the kingdom and a kingship on the throne of Israel forever. So we get to 1 Chronicles 20. And it gives us this account, and we'll end this session with this one, verse 1. Then it happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that Joab led out the army and ravaged the land of the sons of Ammon, and came and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed at Jerusalem, and Joab struck Rabbah and overthrew it. Now, if we remember from the account in 2 Samuel, what happened here? In the springtime, when the kings go out to war, David stayed in Jerusalem. Well, what happened in that account? Well, what we read there is the story of Bathsheba. In 1 Chronicles, it's not in here. It leaves out Bathsheba. It goes on and tells the history, but we're left out of that little segment. So it's good to read both accounts, because you read in the Kings, you'll get some other details. You read in Chronicles, you get different details. And so even though it covers a lot of the same history, it's good to read both of them.